Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining the webinar today. We're very much looking forward to the discussion. You all have a chat function that you're very familiar with, so please feel free to pop in any comments or questions that you have. And we have also opened the raise your hand function. So if you would like to make a comment or have a question, please let us know and we'll try to get to you. We are recording the session today, so if you'd like a copy, please let us know. My name is Lillian Ajuria, and I'm one of the partners of the Ajuria Lawyers, and I'm joined today by Ron Kessels, who's also another partner in the firm. For those of you who don't know us, we are a specialist immigration law firm, and we work mainly with corporate clients, but we also with individuals, and especially through this global talent program that we're very, very much a fan of. Today, we're very happy to welcome our guest speakers. We have Peter Vervo, who has been appointed by the Prime Minister to lead Australia's government Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force. The task force is led by Peter and operates through the Department of Home Affairs and is co-led with the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. Welcome, Peter. We're also joined by Servet Brennan from the Department of Home Affairs as well, and she leads the Business Industry Regional Outreach Office for New South Wales. And Senia Anderson, I think, is joining us by camera. She's based in San Francisco, and she's the first Secretary for Home Affairs and the Global Talent Officer for the Americas. Also today, we have Amy Schultz, the Global Head of Talent Acquisition for Canva, as well as Daniel Jazik, the Global Mobility Specialist also for Canva. And they will both give us an employer's perspective on the Global Talent Visa Program. And also joining us today, we've got the CEO of Preacta, Derek McCartney, who will talk to us and give us some insights about the state of the Australian market, and he will be focusing mainly on the tech sector.
So welcome everyone, my name's Ron Kessels. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got quite a packed agenda, so just thought it might be good to do a little bit of an introduction about why we're all here. So I think Peter no doubt will speak a little bit more to the government's position on all of this, but from our perspective at least, it was the development of the Global Talent Program was really there to compete, for Australia to start competing for talent globally. We are competing with other countries who have similar programs. The UK has a program, Canada has a program, there are other countries with similar programs. And so, you know, we both companies and Australia as a whole are competing for a limited pool of, you know, highly talented individuals, either to come here and work as employees within all your businesses or to, you know, start up new enterprises. So this has become very much a sort of a focus of government. Peter will talk a little bit potentially about the budget and what's happening there, but it's clearly become quite a focus, global talent. Certainly become a very big part of our practice very quickly. The interest is huge. We get, 10 to 20 inquiries a week from very talented people from all over the world who are just reaching out to try and find information and get started. So I think, hats off to government. You've done a great job in sort of promoting this. And it's certainly from our perspective, we can see it immediately that there's a lot of interest. So what is it really about? How does it work? We'll come to a few of the details in a moment, but sort of at the high level, what we're finding is that companies are using it to sort of attract, hire and retain their top talent. As you'd all know, one of the key concerns of a lot of people who come here is what will be their pathway to permanent residence and how can they settle with their families and turn their employment in Australia into a long-term opportunity. And certainly the Global Talent Program is very attractive from that point of view. It gives some certainty to sort of your top talent that they're going to be able to remain here permanently, and also to the company to keep people in Australia. It also, we're getting a lot of inquiries from people who are looking to start up their own businesses. And so this is really feeding in quite a lot into startups. We've got quite a number of applications, even within the last couple of months, I can think of a dozen, where people who are employed in fairly senior or very senior roles within some of the big global tech companies are looking to break out and start something new. And it's really interesting that they're reaching out to us, but to Australia generally, as a place where they're going to do that rather than in the traditional sort of US, California. So what is the actual visa? Well, firstly, it's a permanent, the thing to remember is that it is a permanent residence visa for the applicant and for their families, which means in the current climate, an immediate advantage because no border exemption is required for a person who is granted this visa. They still need to quarantine, obviously, when they come in, but they don't need to go through the border exemption process. So that's of benefit to a number of occupations which are not on the priority list. And so companies are already using that as a way to try and get people into Australia. It has all the benefits, of course, of permanent residence, so Medicare, stamp duty concessions, education costs, eventual route to citizenship, which are all the things that your key employees are often looking for. It's important to know that the visa is independent, so the individuals are actually applying independently for the visa. There's no sponsorship as such, so no formal requirement for sponsorship, but the individuals do need an Australian nominator, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how that works, but they do need an Australian citizen or permanent resident of prominence in their own field to nominate them. Of course, as an independent visa, one of the sort of financial benefits for the company is that there are no training levies. So that's kind of a plus on that side. Who's it for? Well, essentially it's for applicants with an international reputation in one of the key target sectors. Peter will probably mention those target sectors, or we can circulate them later, but predominantly most of the tech industry, a lot of the sciences, a lot even high-end manufacturing, banking and finance. So there's quite a wide range of sectors now that are covered. And so people with an international reputation in that, so we'll talk towards the end a little bit more about what that means, but essentially that, that they're known in more than just their own company and their own country, who have a earning potential. So they're already earning more than 153,000 or have the potential to do so. Then that's kind of the people that are being targeted by the program. There is a second stream to this, and I'm leaving aside the sort of the startups because they really come under the first one, but Peter will talk to, no doubt, what the Global Business and Talent and Attraction Task Force are doing in relation to attracting companies as well. But there is a second sort of stream to it, which is the Global Talent Employer Sponsored stream. It's not used that often. I know a few of our clients have negotiated agreements in place, and essentially for high income earners who are on the 2-year occupation list who otherwise would not have a pathway to permanent residence, that can help create a pathway. So just to finish off before we move on, just so you understand, the application is actually broken into 2 pieces or 2 parts. The first being an expression of interest. So essentially the individual puts a pitch to government as to why they should be invited to apply for a global talent visa. So they're putting their best case forward. And then the second step to it is assuming that they are given an invitation to apply, they actually go through the visa process. We can talk a little bit about timing and how long this all takes. In our experience, it's sort of 3 months start to finish if the person's accepted and they've gone through their medicals and police clearances. I think it varies a little bit, obviously depending on how you're coming through the stream, etc. But that's been our experience to date. So it's sort of a fast, efficient, and very attractive way for people to obtain permanent residence. So I'd like to hand over to Peter Verwer now, who is the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Global Business and Talent Attraction. Peter can introduce his role and what the task force is doing. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Well, thank you for the introduction and thanks for the opportunity to speak today, and welcome to everybody who's on the line for this virtual discussion. We will get into the technicalities later, and I have my 2 colleagues, Svet and Xenia, here to answer any difficult questions. But what I might do is to just spend the next 10 or 15 minutes the objective, really important to understand why the government is doing this in order to understand how the system is going to work and on what basis and what criteria we're using to make assessments about individuals. Because everything is driven by the overarching strategy. Australian governments are often criticised for not being like Singapore or Israel or even the Nordic countries in not having long-term strategic goals. This is a very strategic program. It's a microeconomic reform program. It's part of JobMaker. But the other interesting, I think, defining aspect of it is that even though it's a global business and talent attraction program, if it meets its goals, it will also be a talent retention program too. So there are two big goals we're trying to achieve and two supporting objectives. The big goal is the Prime Minister's brain gain strategy. It is unashamedly an effort to harvest the world for its brightest minds, its greatest talents, its entrepreneurs. And these individuals can be research, academic and cultural entrepreneurs, as well as business moguls or startups or people with a great idea. We're after people who will take risks. One of the questions that may come up later is, do you have to have a successful record as being a business person? Many of the firms that we speak to actually like individuals to have tried and even failed. Not serial failures, of course, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking for here. So this brain gain strategy is an effort to identify individuals rather than wait for them to just knock on our door. Now, we've done this in the past, but we're really ramping it up. And the absolute best way of identifying individuals is reducing 6 degrees of separation to 1 or 2 degrees. Most of the best people that we see come from an introduction, usually from somebody who's already in the system. But yes, we do get individuals from our very now extensive advertising marketing campaign, which is going to further ramp up. And we're also using interesting newer techniques, such as rather than just identifying the individual, we go out into the world and trace patents, and trace ideas, and trace people who are prominent in speaking engagements. And so everybody from a Nobel laureate down. So that's the number one big idea. And the number two is very closely aligned to that, and which is the same thing, but for firms. And we're looking for the marquee, the apex firms, which doesn't mean the big end of town. It can mean firms which are leaders in their areas. And our focus is very much on future-facing industries, as we heard. There are, officially 10. I count them up. It looks like 12 to me. But I see them in these big categories, which is one is inventing and making things again, filling out the entire supply chain in what the government calls its modern or its advanced manufacturing initiative, which is Australia getting back into the business of being self-reliant, which means creating these ecosystems, these clusters and precincts where manufacturing, this modern manufacturing initiative, and that can be in space, agri-tech, med-tech, the circular economy, new resources sectors, hydrogen is a big one at the moment, and then the one I always forget. Anyway, it's making things. Health and life sciences is another huge area of focus for us. There are obvious immediate reasons, but this is also the fastest growing area in the world, driven by technology. And we want, we already have our homegrown talent is already spectacular, but it helps to inject some of the world's talent as well. And we have a lot of Australians coming back, the diaspora, and there's also the alumni from our university, which very sensibly we're not kicking out of the country these days. So, these four elements can help us achieve this goal of building these clusters, building these ecosystems, so that individuals don't need to go, if they want to go overseas, back overseas when the borders open, fine. But let's give them the choice so that they don't need to. So there's a very, very important part of this overarching strategy, which is why I say it's a microeconomic reform program. So bringing in the world's best talent, bringing in the world's fantastic businesses so that they can employ Australians and co-invest with other Australian companies are the two big driving objectives. But supporting that two important aspects, and one is the Prime Minister very kindly, when he appointed me to this job, asked me to report to 6 ministers. Now I've got 7, but my colleagues and I don't complain, because the point of this is that when we identify blockages in Australia's policy framework, we can say to the ministers, look, we understand the overarching strategies to accelerate Australia's capacity in these industries of the future, to transform the nation, create more jobs and lift prosperity. It's a very straightforward goal. But there are these blockers. And we would like to put forward proposals to unblock the system. And you saw in last week's budget, which is the first time that this has been tested, the task force, the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force, proposed 6 measures, and by and large they're adopted. We said Canada has a digital games industry which is 22 times bigger than Australia, and this digital games industry is full of Australians. Right? And this digital games industry, when they have a scientific, a technological breakthrough in animation or whatever, can also be used for keyhole surgery. It can be used for many, has many applications within society. Even New Zealand has a big industry, and we do. And if you add up all of the songs that are sold during the year and all of the movie tickets which are issued, put them all together, they're smaller than the revenue from digital games. This is an area that we want to be. But we can't, because every other country has a policy which is better than ours. They provide a tax offset. And all we propose very simply is that movies and games be treated the same. If you make a movie, you get a tax offset. If you make a game, you should get the same. And the government agreed, and they announced that policy. And I was with the digital game people yesterday. This is a fantastic example of how things work. Even though this new measure will not kick in until the 1st of July next year, they are already, global studios are already bringing forward plans to set up more studios, to commission games here, not just employ more business development managers, but to make things again, create more jobs. Let's see whether these promises turn out to be reality. But it's very encouraging at this stage that so soon they said, if we have this break, if you treat us the same as the movie industry, then we're going to bring all of this business to Australia, which means a whole bunch of Australians won't have to leave. One of the other things that I won't run through all 7. Some of them, like variable capital corporation rules, are far too tedious and not taxing the unrealized gains from hedging contracts. But all of them are trying to do this thing of making us a hub, a financial center and a manager of the world's money. But there is one measure that I will mention which relates to all sectors. And that is no longer when a startup is formed and there's not a capacity to pay people a lot of money, but you give them shares in the company. No longer will it be the case that when you move on, or that you quit, or you separate from the company, that you're going to be taxed on the money that you don't have in your pocket. So under the changes to the employee share scheme, you'll be taxed when the money is in your pocket. So you're still going to be taxed. But the old system discouraged a lot of the world from coming here, and it's been fixed. And that is directly because the minister said, we're keen to hear about proposals that will make Australia a far more vibrant place, but to take risks. So I just mentioned those as examples. And there'll be more in the future. I mean, there will be changes that we propose in relation to the visa system itself. It's no guarantee that these measures will be adopted, but at least what happens is that there's a far more fertile ground for considering public policy measures which are going to meet these big strategic prosperity enhancing objectives. And final thing is, and where I'd ask all of you to please consider helping, is that the success of this program will rely on the fact that the world thinks differently about us. Now, that has already started. I mean, Australia's performance during COVID-19 has provided a very clear X-ray, not just of our leaders, but of society itself, the resilience of Australians. We have done better. And no doubt borders are going to come up in this discussion, but the pandemic is getting worse. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And I'm not just talking about the mutations. There's a podcast from The Economist this morning. So they reckon the 3.2 million people who've died is a massive underestimation. It's probably close to 10, 11 million. But Australia is one of the few countries, very few countries, where there are more Australians alive today than they would have been under business as usual, because we had our act together. Some might have thought things could be done better, but the numbers are clear there, and the world is noticing it. And a lot of them, I've just come from a meeting where I've mentioned a couple of the individuals who've tech giants who are on their way to Australia who've been issued with these visas. And he said, why would they do this? And the answer is because they're looking at the X-ray, that they realize that COVID-23, COVID-24, or some other black swan may well be headed our way. And whether they're a firm or an individual thinking about themselves and their company, they're going, what are my options? And before, Australia was seen as a very successful lifestyle superpower. We still are. This is good. But now we're going to be many more. We're a country that managed COVID well. And we need to keep working to ensure that's the case. That's certainly the Prime Minister's and his colleagues' objective. But we're also now a country which is implementing long-term strategies to grow, accelerate our capacity in these industries of the future. But we need to tell the world about it. We need to make a noise about it. And certainly the High Commissioners and the ambassadors and our colleagues overseas and our global talent officers, who most of whom are now back offshore again, but there's only seven of us. So we need your help to communicate this message. So I'm going to finish on that because I think that's my 15 minutes of fame for me. I'm happy to answer any questions, but make sure the hard ones go to my colleagues.
So thank you for that. And a very, very quick comment on that. I think one of the most attractive parts of the program from an individual's perspective, not from the government, is that it is permanent residence. So that the individual who gets the visa is not subject to any border restrictions, so they're free to travel to Australia. And the other thing is that it's permanent. It's very fast permanent residence, as Ron mentioned. It's anything between 1 and 3 months, what we've seen on average. So it moves very, very quickly. And then the individual has 12 months to enter Australia. So that's probably what we're seeing as one of the most attractive parts, apart from coming to Australia.
Yeah, you don't get permanent residence with the Singapore textiles.
No, certainly not. Right. Well, thanks, Peter. And we'll so questions we'll sort of put at the end. I think it's we've left plenty of time, so hopefully we'll get to it. So we want to move now to Derek, from Preacta, who's going to speak a little bit about what is really happening happening out there in the market. So over to you, Derek.
So thanks, Peter. That was fantastic and great to see what the government is doing from a strategic perspective in terms of trying to enhance the talent makeup of our local ecosystem, because as more of these big global powerhouses and new startups are coming into the local market, it's only going to stretch our talent pools further, and it's going to be more and more challenging to actually hire, broadly speaking, across the ecosystem. So I guess I'll run through some insights today that we've been able to, well, we do capture through our own ecosystem. We are engaging with around 1,083 candidates on average a week since the beginning of September. That's how we gather our insights specific to the local tech ecosystem. But what we have certainly seen across the market and the ecosystem, certainly in the last 3-4 months, is we've definitely shifted from a demand shortage to a supply shortage from a candidate perspective. And recently, Employment Marketplace, SEEK, released the employment report for March 21, and even within that, the ANZ Managing Director, Kendra Banks, said that, from SEEK's perspective, they've seen the highest number of job ads posted on the SEEK, on SEEK in a month in the history, 23-year plus history, whilst at the same time acknowledging that the current applications per job are the lowest they've been since 2012. So the actual local ecosystem for talent within the technology space in particular is really becoming quite stretched. And I'll go through a couple of slides and insights that we can talk through. I'll talk to that today. So within the insights, when I'm referring to the tech market, I'm very much capturing the talent pools and the streams from engineering, software, hardware, quantum computing, data, product, cloud security, and delivery and program management. And I've specifically taken an example out of that data set to focus in on software and cloud engineering, because I think that is probably where the most demand for scale at the moment in the ecosystem right now, plus, as we probably projecting out for the next 6 to 12 months is looking to be. And just to run you through how we've created a talent richness index, which is essentially a representation of the number of people in the ecosystem relative to the actual jobs being advertised at any one point in time for those particular markets. So when we are capturing the number of jobs advertised, we really are looking at companies that are advertising directly. We are removing the noise or the duplication that may be represented through agencies or third-party providers, and very much looking at actual jobs. And what we can see that even within the broader tech market there, we've seen that back in September, we had a 17.61 metric coming through and in the index, and that has already declined at the end of April to 14.93, so it's about an 18% drop. And then within the software and cloud engineering market in particular, that's where we've seen a decline from 12.24 to 10.41, so roughly about a 17% decline in that market too. So that is again representing to say that within software, cloud engineering in particular, we currently have 12.24 now, as it stands, 10.41 candidates in the talent pool, talent in the ecosystem available relative to the number of jobs that are currently being advertised or that our companies are looking to bring in. So we just shift to the next slide, Ron. I guess what I wanted to touch on here is the real changing dynamic of the landscape, because actually since January and really the end of January, February onwards, we've really seen an acceleration in the change of the landscape. So what we've seen is, in our ecosystem, job applications off the back of candidates coming in to express interest in obviously in roles has declined 48.61% since January. But that is actually, January was pretty strong because, of COVID, we've obviously had a lot of talent reprioritizing and thinking about what they wanted to do coming out of COVID. So January was it was actually a strong month for talent coming into the market and looking for roles. It's really February onwards where we've seen about a 41% decline in applications coming through all channels. We also know, talking to partners and the like, and looking into the tech ecosystem, that actually the number of jobs being posted is not a true reflection of the demand and the need for talent in the ecosystem right now. So, for example, within software and cloud engineering, there's generally a 5 to 10x in terms of actually the amount of people that companies are planning to hire or wanting to scale right now. And they're not advertising every single one of those roles because they're the same type of skill set. And so, that is, if anything, obviously going to put more of a squeeze on the richness index, and push that even further down. And then, we obviously, because of the borders, we've seen a significant decline in talent inflow in the last 12 months. So we looked at the JavaScript market in New South Wales as an example, and just compared, the 12 months to May 2020 versus the 12 months since May 2020, and we've obviously seen a 69% decline in that particular skill set coming into our ecosystem, just into New South Wales. Most of those people obviously are Australians returning home, right? That have been able to come in. So again, companies from a pre-COVID perspective, they're not able to access that talent that we were able to access pre-COVID, and that was sort of ensuring that we weren't at a point of stress in being able to scale and hire velocity across technology markets. And then, I mean, I think fundamentally we need to all understand that if we are trying to build global, leaders in technology or product or life sciences or agri-tech, medtech, it's really only the top 20% of that talent in any ecosystem, in our ecosystem, that is actually going to be relevant and at the caliber that these companies need right now to build that product that can compete globally. And so when we're taking into consideration these qualitative factors, around the stress in the environment from a talent pool perspective, as well as, the need to scale. Actually, Ron, if you just go back to the previous slide, what you'll see there is we would see that software and cloud engineering market, well, right now you're probably looking at, it's probably closer to 7, between 6 and 7 as a talent richness index, which is not good. And within the broader tech market, it's down towards high single digits too. So these are obviously harder, more difficult to measure components specifically, because it's very much through our ecosystem and the discussions and insights we get, and it's not necessarily published data to obviously reference as a consistent point. But it is definitely something that I think as a technology ecosystem we really need to be mindful of right now, that we are at a point, heading towards a point of inflection, that talent is incredibly short, technology talent is incredibly short. And looking at this type of initiative, global talent, initiative is fundamental, I think, to us in the short term, whilst the border situation is what it is, in being able to bring, global leadership talent, thought leadership talent into our ecosystem that companies can actually, hire effectively and ensure that they are scaling in line with the business objectives in the short term. Yeah, next one. So I guess just a couple of opportunities in terms of the global talent initiative is that we think companies and the ecosystem should be looking at broadly from a broadly speaking perspective. So within our ecosystem, what we've seen is a huge increase in demand actually for experienced and senior level tech talent. So we've categorized the experienced and senior level tech talent being professionals with sort of 8 years plus of that working experience in that particular technology field. And as you can see, that really since January, we've seen an exponential growth in the demand for that level of expertise and experience across the tech ecosystem now and our ecosystem. And so really thinking, what is that representing? That's representing the fact that companies that come through COVID in Australia with very strong balance sheet, the government support's obviously been phenomenal around that. However, they're all wanting to build new teams, new product. They are scaling, they're looking to acquire businesses, and what they do need is they need more experienced leaders coming in to ultimately lead those teams so that they can scale underneath them. The other and then the other component in considering that is also the remote working consideration, and the fact that as companies coming through COVID have got more of a distributed workforce, there's definitely more of an appeal for them to be hiring at the more senior and more experienced level of a profession, as they need to operate in more autonomous type environments. Next one. And then, something we are hearing a lot of, and it has been a consistent issue even for a number of years pre-COVID, is the fact that gender diversity in particular within the Australian tech ecosystem is not where we need it to be. We need to be striving obviously towards a balanced makeup of that population. Specifically within, looking at the software and cloud engineering market there on the right, overall, we estimate that there's about a 17% representation of females in that overall population of software and cloud engineering workforce and tech talent in Australia. However, at the senior end, so that's the 8 years plus level, we see that drop to 14% of that population. And I guess where that's a challenge is twofold. So one is, organizations are doing a terrific job in terms of trying to increase diversity and representation of females within the technology ecosystem through university programs and graduate programs, and bringing in them females, the balanced representation through their channels that way. But there's also a need to have real thought leaders and senior females that are aspirational leaders and I guess very high caliber from a technical perspective, so that they can also attract more balanced diversity, representations into their teams and into their organizations. But as an ecosystem, what this is telling us is that we just don't have enough representation of female leaders from a technical perspective. And so I believe that we should be utilizing a program like the GTI to really be targeting, world-class female leaders in technical technology markets to bring into our ecosystem, because that's truly how we can actually shift the dial, not immediately, but 3, 4, 5 years down the track, because that's a real opportunity Australia has right now. So that's all from me today.
Thanks, Derek. That's great insights, and no doubt there'll be some questions at the end, and we can get you to jump back in. So now, just to give us a bit of a practical sort of company perspective, we've got Amy and Dan from Canva on the line, and so I'll hand over to you both to talk about your own experiences or the company's experiences using the GTI and how you see it kind of either how you see it helping and working for you.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Ron and Andrea, for inviting Dan and I to speak with you all today. Peter, really enjoyed listening to you, and likewise, Derek, I think some of the data that we were going to share today definitely aligns with what you've shared. I'm one of these Australians that have recently moved back. And I'm also the benefit of being able to live and work overseas through programs like this. I've just returned to Australia after 7 years abroad, living and working in China, Singapore, and most recently in Silicon Valley, and very happy to be home and very happy to talk to you about, I think, a topic that I'm certainly passionate about, and also experiencing firsthand the challenges of recruiting for a hyper-growth tech company in Australia. And I'll pass it over to Dan to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, just echoing what Amy said, thanks so much for having us today. It's been really insightful so far. So I'm not one of those Australians that's returned. I've stayed in Australia. I've been fortunate enough to kind of avoid, for the most part, COVID. I joined at the height of COVID. So my, first year as a global mobility specialist at Canva has been very, very interesting and very enlightening. Probably the biggest thing that I hear all the time from all the candidates coming across to Australia is pretty much get me out of here. We source a lot from the US, the UK, Russia, a lot. And a lot of those candidates are just very excited to come to Australia, to hear all the good things that are going on in Australia. So that's been my biggest sort of insight so far in my first 12 months. But I think just introducing Canva and what we actually do. So Canva is an online design and publishing tool, and our mission is to empower everyone in the world to design anything and publish anywhere. So we are in the digitech space. So we do predominantly hire tech, design, and marketing professionals on visas. So we do source those people mostly from overseas. We are in a state of hypergrowth. So we are incredibly thirsty at the moment for tech talent, or talent just in general. So probably just some stats to just give a bit of an overview. So in Canva, Australia, our workforce is 80% locals, so Australian citizens and permanent residents, and probably around 20% temporary visa holders. So that kind of fits with what Derek was mentioning. So about a fifth of our workforce are on temporary visas. So with all the border restrictions, with COVID, with everything that's going on, it's been a challenge to plug that kind of 20% sort of area of Canva, and they're typically more mid to senior range sort of talents as well. But I guess the big message is that Canva does try to hire local where we can. So our stats kind of show we are hiring locally where we possibly can, but there's always going to be a need to source at least, around the 20% mark from overseas markets. But I'll just push on to Amy to talk about kind of the trends we're seeing in the talent market at the moment.
Thanks, Dan. And so my role is heading up recruiting for Canva, and very fortunate in we are seeing really strong applicant flows to our jobs here. In April alone, we had 12,000 job applications, but we're still not able to fill all of our roles with those applications. And the reason why is, I think the size of the talent pool that we have in Australia, similar to some of the data that Derek shared earlier, only, according to LinkedIn data, only 2% of the global talent pool for product designers are in Australia. And Canva, we're the 5th largest employer of those. Only 1.5% of the global talent pool for product managers is in Australia, and about 1% of the software engineering global talent pool is in Australia. So we have, we are growing exponentially at the moment, and we're in a bit of a situation where we are actually able to hire at pace for engineers. The last couple of months, we've actually hired a software engineer every 3 hours at Canva, which is kind of nuts. But we're not able to keep up with the ratios of hiring product designers and product managers. Generally kind of rule of thumb, sort of, world-class tech teams generally operate at a ratio of 8 engineers to every 1 product manager or designer. And at the pace that we are recruiting right now, we'll probably be around 2,000 engineers in the next sort of 3 years, and we'll need a product team of around 250. And we can't source that talent, unfortunately, locally in Australia. So we do need to leverage programs like this for us to be able to continue to develop product in Australia. I think that's a differentiation of Canva, is we are manufacturing product in Australia. And, Derek, those stats that you shared earlier around, the gender split, but particularly in software engineers, I think there's around 8,000 women plus engineers on LinkedIn in Australia. And, we do definitely need more senior female leaders in tech, full stop. And, at Canva, we are here to enable folks to design anything on any device. And I really underline that, anyone, because for us to be able to build products for the world in Australia, it's really important that we hire diverse folks to design and build those products. Having experienced working in Silicon Valley, where for a number of years, kind of the same people were building the same products. And, it's no surprise that the tech industry has experienced huge backlash over the last few years for a lack of diversity. And I think we have such a unique opportunity to leverage programs like this to really help us recruit more inclusively and more diverse talent, because I think if we do that, kind of everyone wins. And I'll pass it back over to Dan to talk about how specifically we've been leveraging this program at Canva to help retain our talent, not just attract it.
Thanks, Amy. So yeah, with the GTI program, it's been a really cool game changer for us. So I think one of the biggest things that we get as a global mobility specialist for people coming across is that they'll probably spend around 6 months or so settling into Australia, settling into the lifestyle, and then they realize, hey, this is an amazing country. I want to, put down some roots here and I want to live here. How do I do that? So for the most part, like probably most people at Canva will probably have a pathway to PR, but there is going to be a group of people who fall under the short-term list, particularly our marketing professionals. And so when they come to us, wanting to plan down roads, how do they do this? How do we retain them? I think the GTI tool for us as a lever can be used kind of split between a retention tool and an attraction tool. So Canva's mostly been using it as a retention tool to date. So most requests that we get coming through to us is people already working at Canva in Australia wanting to, stay on as a permanent resident. And how do we do that? So, our software engineers come through. The great thing about the GTI is that there's no need for a skills assessment. I'll just say the ACS skills assessment is incredibly convoluted and a lot of engineers, they're the smartest people. So if they can't figure it out, it is really tough and it's very bureaucratic. The fact that they don't have to do that for the GTI is a really big plus. So thank you, Peter and the team, for making that possible, because when I tell people this, they're very surprised and very skeptical that they don't have to do it, but they don't have to do it. So that's been a big pain point. So a lot of people actually like going through the GTI for the very reason of not needing to do a skills assessment. And it's around the same price as the 186 visa from an applicant's point of view as well. So that's really great. And then there's also those that don't have pathways to PR like historically, but they may be eligible under the GTI pathway. So we're kind of working through that at the moment. We probably have around 10 to 15 at least queries coming through, and people starting to collect documents, and we're working through in the background, starting to make that happen. So there's around those kind of people coming through. And then the other side is the attraction tool. So how we're actually attracting top talent with the border closures. And I'll just say the borders closures and the quarantine have been a necessary evil, I suppose, for Australia. It's helped us, stay afloat and kept us in the good position that we are. So we do support that, and we do help our candidates when they're coming across, kind of doing a how-to guide, what to expect, what's going to happen, what they can do, what they can't do, that kind of thing, because it is something that I'm sure that the border officials do get a lot of pain on their side when people come through and may not necessarily know what they're in for, but we want to make sure that it's as easy a process as possible for everyone. So looking at the attraction tool, I'll just give one example. So I think a couple of months ago, we had one of our founders wanted to hire this really, really top talent. And this top talent he's a data analytics person, don't fully understand everything, but he was a data analytics person. And he basically built the foundations of Uber data analytics, and we really wanted him. So he was looking around at different areas to go. He's originally from China, so I think he was considering going to China, remaining in the US, and then Canva came in and was like, hey, want to come to Australia? It's not something he'd ever kind of considered as a place to go. So we had our work cut out for us trying to get him to come. And we actually used the Global Talent Visa as kind of an attraction tool to be like, hey, you can get pathways to PR. It's super simple, straightforward. He already had, citizenship of China, so visas weren't an issue for him there. He had a green card in Australia, in the US, so there was no issues there. So having to work extra hard to get him to come to a place he'd never thought about, and there was no certainty of visas for him. The GTI was actually a good tool in that sense, because it was quite simple and straightforward, and quite quick as well. So that was one example of how we tried pivoting the GTI tools and attraction measure. But we are now looking, because of the border restrictions, and it seemed like the budget mentioned it was probably going to stay until mid next year. We're kind of looking at how we can use the GTI more and leverage that more in attracting the top talent around the world. We have a few people in the UK we're kind of considering at the moment going under this, because I think there'd be perfect candidates for us. As Amy mentioned, we're kind of struggling to find product designers and managers. So we're kind of thinking it's probably mostly for those kind of people to hop onto those visas to help us through, because currently they're not on that PMSOL critical skill list. So I think they'd be perfect candidates for that.
I was just saying, it's having been through different visa processes myself, it's not often that a visa process is described as fairly simple and straightforward. So kudos, Peter and the team for that. And, circling back to something you said earlier around our local talent being spectacular, it is. And I definitely, want for Canva to play a part in really showcasing where a career in Australia can take you, particularly in tech. Myself personally, I probably thought moving back to Australia may have meant that my career would take a back seat, and that is certainly not the case. I'm so fortunate that moving back here is accelerating my career, and I always think, was that rising tide lifts all boats, and for us to really, participate in really fostering the tech ecosystem in Australia, we all win. And I think for Australia to be positioned as a global player, particularly in the tech space, I think that is an advantage of all companies that operate here now, and hopefully also, in the future. And I always think it's important to play it forward. And I think, Canva, we definitely want to play an active part in, and also building a sense of belonging within the tech community here in Australia, and really fostering both innovation but also inclusive innovation. So this program I see will hopefully enable us as well as other companies to do that more in the future.
Thanks, Amy and Dan, and look, thank you also. You're probably too modest to say, but there's a couple of very talented individuals that are now only in Australia because of Canva's support, even though you were not employing them, but that you looked at them as being able to contribute to the ecosystem and supported their nomination for this. So thank you for that, and we'll talk a little bit about that a bit further on, maybe with Peter, just about that connection between really talented people and Australia, and how do we bridge that gap with nominators where there's not an employment situation necessarily. So thank you both for your insights. So we'll just move on from there. I noticed the time, so managed to skip a slide. So look, I just perhaps a couple of little points from us, and then we'll hand over to questions, because I think we've got 10 minutes or so, 8 minutes left. So I'll be super fast, and I won't recover cover again what's already been covered. So we are seeing, as I said, a lot of people contacting us from all over the world. So it's obviously been successful. The processing times are relatively short. They do vary a bit, we find. So we'll talk about perhaps a bit later about what we can do or see about how that might be, how we could even that out. I think one of the areas, and perhaps there'll be some questions about this, is, well, who has an international reputation? Like, who are you really looking for? And Peter outlined obviously the cream of the crop, and we all know those when we see them. And I think the real question here is, like, from leaving aside the very, very, creme de la creme people at the top, what's necessary for the rest of the kind of the program? And we have found over a year and a half or so of experience that we can sort of identify when we see it. There's plenty of really highly talented people that we just all know would be, beneficial to Australia. So they're kind of easy. I'm sure that Peter and the team are dealing with like thousands and thousands of other applications where everyone's kind of throwing in their hat in the ring to see just, whether they'll get an invitation. So perhaps Peter or the team might just speak a little bit to what you kind of are looking for there at that next level. And then just also, we get a lot of questions around the earnings comparisons. Again, we're finding that 9 out of 10 of the people that approach us, at least, they're all in that super high bracket. There is a little bit of, we've got people from the Middle East, for example, where they don't pay any tax, and so their salaries are lower, but they're kind of taking home more than you do in Australia. So there's a little bit there of kind of, trying to even out how you look at salary and earning capacity. But for the rest, the program's really easy to use. Congratulations to the team. I think it's going to be clearly from Canva and Derek and others, it's going to play an important role for most employers in Australia that are in the spaces that we're looking at going forward. So without further ado, I'll just hand over to some questions. Have we got questions, Lillian?
Yeah, so one of the questions asked, what sort of profiles are we seeing through the Global Talent Program? Obviously, tech is quite big, as we've discussed today, but they're asking what other profiles are you looking for? I guess you mentioned the sectors, perhaps some of the examples. We can tell you that some of the examples we've seen. I wake up to an email from somebody in Africa over the last couple of weeks. Interestingly, we have seen a lot of interest coming from African countries. And this morning was, I'm an environmental engineer with a PhD and I specialize in weeds. I'm interested in migrating to Australia. So we're getting a huge variety of candidates, not just in the tech sector, but in many, many different areas. And I guess you're receiving more than us.
Yeah. Can I respond to the question first as well? I mean, a lot of work is required there. So one dimension, first, is the male-female splits. So one of the things that we're doing is advertising specifically for female STEM candidates in Asia.
Fantastic.
Why just in Asia? Because there's not many platforms one can use to actually get to that market, but there happens to be one in Asia. So we're going to spend a reasonable amount of money making them aware of this program. The split between male and female of the 5,000 or so individuals who've been offered global talent visas, and before that, the distinguished talent visa, is pretty even, but it's a false number. It's because the partners are included in that number. Anyway, we see there's more needs to be done. So who are we attracting by type? If you look at the 5,000 or so who've been offered the global talent visa, a third of them are in the digitech space. So that's everything from quantum computing, AR, VR, long-range Wi-Fi. That's the whole STEM area. So there's many subcomponents to it, but let's just call it digitech. It includes a lot of software engineers and the rest of them. We did advertise the H-1Bs during the US election. It was interesting. I think it was more successful as an awareness-raising program. It's very hard to determine whether if you attract a specific market, you get those individuals. The next biggest category is health and life sciences. So that's 26%. So in both these categories, I mean, the digitech, we're talking about 1,500 people that have been given these visas over the quite short life of this program. And health and life sciences over a quarter, so that's 1,200 people. The next biggest category, 20%, is energy and resources. So a lot of that is in renewables. So yeah, Australia has big plans in hydrogen. I mean, it has more solar than anywhere else on the planet. There's a lot that needs to be stitched up with the transmission systems and whatever. So there are a lot of people there. Also in the more traditional resources area, traditional in terms of being, say, iron ore, or bauxite, or whatever. But the people that we bring in help mines talk to each other. Robotics is an area where Australia is a world leader. So all of these people are globally talented. Yeah. And yes, it was fairly easy to work it out. And we recognize that there's a hierarchy of global talent, and that just getting in the superstars is a mistake, because they need to have the support of all of the locals, the alumni, the expats, and whatever. Otherwise, the system will disintegrate again if once the world opens its borders fully. And then we've got a stack of financial services, ag tech, defense. We're getting more and more. Cyber is a big area that we're focusing on. Space, telemetry. So these categories, not surprisingly, map directly on to those sectors that I mentioned before. Yeah. I'll just mention that in terms of at the sort of platinum level, the US, Hong Kong, UK, the core level of globally talented people is far more diverse, amazingly diverse. There was somebody from Cameroon the other day, and Nigeria, Iranians. These people are very well educated. They only come in if they can pass meet our economic and strategic criteria.
So one of the new sectors, there's a question here, one of the new sectors that was added, I think it was earlier this year, was tourism. Could you give us some examples of what sort of the kind of applicants is in that sector? Because that's of quite a lot of interest to a lot of our clients.
So tourism and leisure,
yeah.
And leisure includes the whole Aussie wood story. Yeah. So Australia as a moving, making ecosystem that has, there's a lot of people go to Byron Bay. We've given some of these people global talent visas, but it's more producers than actors.
Actors have the other program.
We yeah, the old program. What we want in Australia is a movie industry. It employs lots of people. But to do that, a lot needs to be done, and infrastructure needs to be in it as one of the categories as well. So we've got to build out the entire ecosystem. And I've already mentioned digital games, and we see digital games, and so not gaming, digital games. We see all of that animation and post-production up to making the movies and whatever as a spectrum. And with the whole thing here, because it employs lots of people, these are great jobs, it adds a lot to the GDP. That is part of tourism and leisure and entertainment. So that tourism is a code word for entertainment and leisure. I can't think of like a globally talented tourism people will be more on the business side of things. It's not cooks.
Yeah. Another question, and I think this is more for Xenia, for you, Seven, is that one of the concerns is that people understand they get permanent residence, but they're given a time within which they must enter Australia, and it's usually 12 months. And whether there's any appetite from government to perhaps look at providing extensions for some individuals, especially during the pandemic, because there's so much disruption with the movement of people.
There's also the X number of years in total number of years as well.
That's a very good question. I'm not aware of any concessions that are being provided at this point. We can certainly escalate that as a query. My understanding is that at this stage, the 12-month period is still the expectation. But yeah, I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, I mean, they are permanent residents, so they get in the same queue as other permanent residents. But yeah, there are. I mean, it took 3 months to get me back from Singapore, but not 12 months. But look, if they're extenuating circumstances or whatever, and these do come up from time to time, medical reasons, whatever, then they can be looked at. But the other thing that does come up that people claim they don't understand is you got to be here 2 years out of 5. So I mean, they want to be permanent residents. So I mean, it's not continuous. It's 2 out of 5. It seems a lot of people would think that's too low, too easy.
It's more generous than other countries. Other countries are
That's right.
higher. I think we're running out of time. We've got lots of questions coming up. A lot of them we can answer them, but obviously we'd like to take the opportunity to thank everybody. Peter, you came up from Canberra, so thank you very much for coming today. So it's Sydney based, but thank you for coming for Altos. We've got Xenia from San Francisco joining us. Thank you, Xenia, and obviously to Amy and also Daniel joining us remotely, and Derek was in office today. So thank you, everybody, and we really look forward to talking to you more about this amazing program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
You.
Bye.
As in, yeah.